The wedding had barely ended when Adrian Blackwood asked for a divorce. The guests were still laughing in the grand ballroom, crystal glasses clinking beneath chandeliers that cost more than most homes, when he loosened his tie and looked at Elena with a cold calm that stunned her more than anger ever could. She was still wearing the white dress chosen by his mother, still smiling out of habit, still trying to understand how a marriage arranged for power and reputation could collapse within hours of its beginning. Adrian's voice was low and controlled as he said it was a mistake, that this marriage had served its purpose, and that they would quietly separate before the tabloids found anything to feed on. Elena felt the world tilt. She had agreed to this marriage knowing it wasn't born of love, but she had believed in time, in shared effort, in the possibility that two strangers could grow into something real. She hadn't expected tenderness on their wedding night, but she hadn't expected rejection either. Adrian explained that he had never wanted a wife, that his empire demanded focus, and that emotions complicated things. He promised her a generous settlement, an apartment anywhere she wished, and a clean break. To him, it was a business decision. To her, it felt like being erased. She didn't beg. Pride held her upright as she nodded, excused herself, and walked out of the suite before her tears could fall. She wandered the long corridors of the estate, the echo of her heels sounding too loud in the quiet. In a secluded garden lit by soft lanterns, Elena finally let herself breathe. She thought of the years she had spent proving she was more than a pretty face, the way she had accepted this marriage to protect her family from financial ruin, and the cruel irony that she was being discarded before dawn. She didn't notice Adrian watching from a distance, his jaw tight, until he turned away, convincing himself that ending it quickly was the kindest thing he could do. The next morning, the news of their marriage filled headlines, but the truth remained hidden behind polished smiles. Adrian left early for the city, burying himself in meetings. Elena stayed behind, unsure of her place in a house that no longer felt hers. She decided to leave for a few hours, craving anonymity. Dressed simply, she walked through a nearby neighborhood Adrian had never bothered to see, where wealth thinned into ordinary life. It was there she encountered an elderly woman struggling to lift fallen boxes outside a small charity clinic. Without thinking, Elena rushed to help, kneeling on the pavement, her expensive shoes forgotten. Inside the clinic, Elena learned the woman was caring for children who couldn't afford treatment. Moved by stories of quiet suffering, she stayed longer than planned, assisting however she could. When a child smiled at her with gratitude, something in her chest softened. For the first time since the wedding, she felt useful, real. She didn't know that Adrian, delayed by an unexpected detour, would pass by and see her through the clinic window, laughing gently with a child as she cleaned a scraped knee. The sight stopped him cold. This wasn't the poised socialite he thought he'd married. This was a woman with warmth, patience, and a depth he had never taken the time to notice. He watched as Elena comforted the elderly woman, promising to return, her sincerity unmistakable. Something uneasy stirred in him, a feeling he usually crushed without mercy. Curiosity followed him back to the office, lingering through meetings he barely heard. That night, Adrian returned to the estate earlier than usual. He found Elena in the library, reading quietly, the tension between them heavy but unspoken. He mentioned the clinic, carefully, as if testing unfamiliar ground. Elena looked up, surprised, then guarded. She spoke of the people she met, not accusing him, not asking for anything. Just sharing. Adrian listened, truly listened, for the first time. The decision he had made so confidently began to crack, replaced by questions he hadn't allowed himself to ask before. And in that fragile silence, the divorce no longer felt as simple as it had the night before. Adrian didn't sleep that night. The image of Elena at the clinic replayed in his mind, clashing with the assumptions he had built around her since the day their families announced the engagement. He had labeled her as compliant, elegant, and temporary, someone who would fit neatly into his world and quietly step aside. Now that image felt thin and dishonest. By morning, he found himself waiting for her at breakfast, an unusual choice he justified as necessity rather than interest. When Elena entered the dining room, her posture was calm but distant, as if she had already learned how to exist beside him without belonging to him. Their conversation was polite, cautious, like two strangers negotiating shared space. Adrian asked about the clinic again, this time with genuine questions. Elena answered without embellishment, explaining how her mother had once relied on similar charities when Elena was younger, how she had promised herself she would never look away from quiet suffering. Adrian listened, uncomfortable with the realization that she carried a history he had never bothered to learn. He felt a strange pull, not desire, but respect, which unsettled him far more. Later that day, Adrian invited Elena to join him in the city, claiming it would help maintain appearances. She almost refused, suspecting another performance, but something in his tone made her agree. In the car, the silence was heavy, yet not hostile. When they passed the clinic, Adrian surprised himself by asking the driver to stop. Elena looked at him in disbelief as he stepped out and walked inside without hesitation. The staff recognized her immediately, greeting her with warmth, and she watched as Adrian awkwardly offered to fund repairs the building desperately needed. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was unpolished, real. The visit changed something between them. On the drive back, Adrian admitted he hadn't grown up seeing kindness modeled, that everything in his life had been measured by profit and loss. Elena didn't excuse him, but she understood him better, and that understanding softened her guardedness. That evening, they shared dinner without an audience, speaking honestly about their expectations and disappointments. Adrian confessed that he had asked for the divorce out of fear, not indifference. Fear of attachment, of vulnerability, of losing control. Elena listened quietly, her hurt still present, but now layered with clarity. Episode 4 unfolded with tension from the outside world. Rumors began to circulate when Adrian cancelled several public appearances with Elena. His family grew suspicious, especially his mother, who demanded Elena play her role flawlessly. At a formal charity gala, Elena was paraded as the perfect billionaire wife, her every movement scrutinized. Adrian watched as she endured whispered judgments with grace, and for the first time, anger flared in him on her behalf. When a guest made a cruel remark about her background, Adrian intervened sharply, drawing a clear line that left the room silent. That night, after the gala, Elena confronted him. She told him she would not be a decoration in his world, not for his family, not for society. She said she would leave with dignity if that was all he wanted. Adrian didn't interrupt. When she finished, he admitted that seeing her treated as disposable had awakened something fierce inside him. He apologized, not with excuses, but with ownership. He told her he didn't want a divorce anymore, not because of obligation, but because he wanted the chance to truly know her. Elena didn't accept immediately. She told him trust couldn't be bought or rushed, that words meant little without consistent action. Adrian agreed, surprising them both. He promised transparency, patience, and effort, knowing none of it came naturally to him. As they stood in the quiet hallway, the distance between them felt smaller, though not gone. The marriage was no longer a contract waiting to be dissolved, but a fragile possibility, trembling between what had been broken and what might still be built. Adrian began to change in ways that were small but unmistakable. He didn't announce his efforts or expect praise. Instead, he adjusted his life to make space for Elena. Meetings were rescheduled, dinners no longer happened alone in his study, and the walls of the estate felt less cold as shared routines quietly formed. Elena noticed his attempts but remained cautious, guarding her heart with the same care she once used to protect her family. Trust, she knew, was rebuilt in moments, not declarations. One afternoon, Adrian invited Elena to visit the foundation he secretly funded, a project he had never allowed anyone to see. It was a shelter for displaced families, one that operated far from the spotlight. He admitted he had built it years ago after witnessing a factory closure devastate a community, but he had kept it hidden, afraid that revealing compassion would be seen as weakness. Elena walked through the shelter with him, listening to the stories of people who knew Adrian only as a quiet benefactor. Seeing him in that space, humbled and human, shifted something deep within her. Their closeness grew, not through romance, but through understanding. They argued sometimes, honestly and without cruelty. Elena challenged Adrian when he retreated into control, and Adrian learned to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. One evening, Elena shared her greatest fear, that she would lose herself again by loving someone who didn't truly see her. Adrian didn't promise perfection. He promised awareness, a vow that felt heavier and more sincere than any rehearsed romance. Episode 6 unfolded with an unexpected crisis. A financial scandal erupted around Adrian's company, threatening everything he had built. Board members urged him to distance himself from Elena to avoid distraction and potential liability. Old instincts pushed him toward isolation, toward sacrifice disguised as protection. For a brief, painful moment, he almost repeated the same mistake, drafting plans to send Elena away until the storm passed. Elena sensed the shift immediately. Instead of waiting for another rejection, she confronted him, her voice steady but resolute. She told him she would not be sheltered from his life, nor discarded for convenience. If they were to remain married, it would be as partners, not liabilities. Adrian listened, the weight of her words cutting through his fear. For the first time, he chose differently. When the scandal peaked, Adrian appeared publicly with Elena by his side, refusing to hide her. He took responsibility for corporate failures, addressed the media with transparency, and rejected the board's pressure to maintain a false image. Elena stood with him, not silent, but composed and present, her strength evident without spectacle. The public response was unexpected. Investors steadied, trust began to rebuild, and Adrian's honesty earned him something his wealth never had, credibility. In the aftermath, the estate felt transformed. The marriage was no longer defined by obligation or survival, but by mutual choice. One quiet night in the garden where Elena had cried after the wedding, Adrian apologized again, not for appearance, but for impact. He acknowledged the harm he had caused and the patience she had shown. Elena, finally certain of his sincerity, allowed herself to let go of some of her guardedness. She didn't say she forgave him completely, but she said she believed in what they were becoming. Adrian took her hand, not possessively, but carefully, as if aware of its value. In that moment, the divorce papers remained unsigned, forgotten not by accident, but by intention. What had begun as a contract and nearly ended in indifference had transformed into something fragile, honest, and real, a marriage no longer sustained by wealth or obligation, but by the deliberate choice to stay and grow together.